So today we're going to talk about factoring, but in order to talk about factoring, first we have to talk about FOIL method and what that means. So FOIL means first, outer, inner, last. So it's just a way of distributing. So we could rewrite this as A times C plus D, and then we could distribute there. And then we could do B times C plus D and distribute there. And get the same thing as if we multiply first, outer, there's our A times our C and our D, plus our inner and our last. Okay? So the FOIL method is just a shortcut to distributing. So what this represents here is the first two terms multiplied, plus the outer, plus the inner, plus the last. So when we do that, we get something called a trinomial. And those two binomials, so these are binomials, they have two terms. Those two binomials that we multiplied together wind up being our factors, or they are, I guess, our factors of our trinomial. Okay. Sorry, my pencil. Okay. All right, so these are our factors. So when we're looking at this backwards, which is what we're going to be doing when we're factoring, we start with a trinomial. And this is a coefficient of the trinomial, this B. The C is a constant of the trinomial. And we wind up getting some binomials with constants. And sometimes coefficients too, and we'll go into that also today. But we're going to start with some basic ones, and then we're going to move on to a little bit more intense ones. All right, so the first thing is factor by grouping. So we use this when there are four terms. So if there's four terms, we can use factor by grouping. And I've got the steps written down here, and we're going to walk through them together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put parentheses around the first and second terms, and then we're going to put parentheses around the third and fourth terms. Okay? And you noticed I put a parenthesis around this plus sign here. Okay? You're going to want to make sure you do that. Now we're going to pull out any greatest common factor, okay, or the common factor from the first two terms, and we're going to factor it out. Well, we can divide both of these by 7, 7 divided by 7, and 21 divided by 7, and this x to the third is really x times x times x, and we have an x over here, so they also have an x in common. Okay, so I'm going to take a 7x out of that one. And then this one, I'm going to factor out a 2 because that's what they have in common. Okay, so now I'm going to go on ahead and do this division. So when I rewrite this, I'm going to write this as my greatest common factor and then a parenthesis. And my parenthesis is going to be what's left. Okay, so x squared plus 3 is what's left when I divide this by 7x. Okay, and then I'm going to pull this 2 out, and it's a positive 2. Which leaves me with x squared plus 3. Okay, now you notice these two parentheses match. If they do not match, you've done something wrong. Okay, so that is one of your factors. And your other factor are these other two pieces that you bring together. So that now is our factored trinomial. If we multiply these two things back together using our FOIL method, okay, then we'll wind up with this again. So let's take a look at this next one. Okay, I'm going to put my parentheses around my first two terms and around my third and fourth terms. I'm going to factor out what these have in common. Okay. So this one would have an x squared in common, and this one would have an 5 in common. So now it's going to be x squared times x minus 1, minus 2. Because I did not divide by a 2 there. Okay, so 2 divided by 1 is 2. Here I'm going to take a positive 5 out, and I'm left with x minus 2. These match, so I know I'm on the right track. That's one of my factors, and there's my other factor. And really what you're doing in this last step is you're factoring out this because it's a greatest common factor now. okay, because you have this plus or minus sign here. And the really important thing to remember here, and I put it here, is that from the third and fourth terms, you have to factor at least a 1 out. Okay, there always has to be something factored out. So if this was like an x squared plus 6, I would have to put a 1 out here and then just leave it as x squared plus 6. Okay, you have to factor something out of those third and fourth terms. You cannot ever leave that. Okay. But now we're going to actually, so that's factoring by grouping. So that's if there's 4 terms. So that's the very first thing you're going to look for. Okay? And in factoring, you always want to also look for common factors of all the terms, which you will start seeing here. Okay? So I didn't make any of these where you could factor out, you know, a 3 out of every one of these. But you would want to look for that also. Okay? So let's go on ahead and move to steps to factor trinomials. Okay, so I've got all these steps listed out. We're not going to read through every one of them right now, but I'm going to walk you through them, okay, as we do some examples. Okay, so our first step, anytime we're factoring trinomials, and if you've learned a different method that you're comfortable with, that is fine. Okay, but I'm going to walk you through the way that we teach it here at Colony, and then you can decide if you prefer this method or if you like whatever method you've been taught better. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to circle my A term and my C term, including any signs. Okay, so now I'm going to write down what my A times C is. So now my A times C is negative 12x squared. Okay, I need to make a list of factors. So remember, factors are 2 numbers that multiply to this. So I'm going to start with 1. So 1 times negative 12, okay, 1x times negative 12x. Or I could do negative 1x and 12x. I could do 2x and negative 6x, or negative 2x and 6x. And it's important that you always remember that you can always do different signs, okay? So make sure that you're writing all of those down. So negative 3x and positive 4x, or positive 3x and negative 4x. And then 5 is not a factor. And then we're back to 6, which we've already done. So that's our entire factor list. If you can't find the factors, you probably don't have all the factors done. Okay. Our next step is we're gonna put a circle around the values here that add to this term. Okay, so they have to add to that. So the only pair that adds to that is negative 3x and positive 4x. And you see, that's why we need to have the negatives and the positives. Because this one, if we added it, would give us negative x, and this one gives us positive x. So you have to make sure you have the correct pair. Otherwise, when you do your factor by grouping, which we're about to do, which is what we did on the last page, you're not going to get the right answer. Okay, so now all I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this x, and I'm going to call it negative 3x plus 4x. So I'm not changing what it is, I'm just changing the way it looks. This is still positive x, but now it's broken into 2 terms instead. Okay, so now I'm going to have x squared minus 3x plus 4x minus 12. And it doesn't matter what order you put these in, you're going to get the same answer no matter what. Now I'm just going to do my factor by grouping like I did on the last page. So I'm going to put my parentheses around my first 2 terms, parentheses around my last 2 terms. Okay, these 2 terms have an x in common, so I'm going to take an x out, which leaves me with x minus 3. These 2 terms have a 4 in common, so I'm going to pull a positive 4 out. I'm going to get x minus 3. Okay, these 2 match, so I know I've done it right. Okay, and then this is my other factor. So now if I were to multiply these 2 things back together, I would get this trinomial right here. So my answer then is x plus 4 times x minus 3. Okay, that's my completed answer. So let's go on ahead and take a look at another one here. Okay, so this one we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to circle my A and my C, and I get 6x squared. Now I'm going to find my factors. So 1x and 6x. Okay, and in this case, they either both have to be positive or they both have to be negative to equal a positive when they multiply. Okay, so I still have those 2 different signs, but the signs are a little bit different than this first example. So now I could do 2x and 3x, or negative 2x and negative 3x. Okay, 4, no, 5, no. Okay, so that is my list right there. Now, I'm going to go on ahead and circle the two that add to positive 5x. Okay, so there's my two that add to positive 5x, and this is where if you get your signs wrong, you will really be in a hurt because you'll circle the wrong pair. Okay, and students come to me all the time at the end and they say, hey, these don't match. You know, what did I do wrong? Well, you found your wrong pair here. So if these two don't match at the end, always go back to that factor list and make sure you have the correct pair. Okay, so now I'm going to replace that 5x, and remember, I'm just changing the way it looks. So 5x is going to become 2x plus 3x, and then I'm going to write that plus 6. Okay? So I've rewritten this thing, and I've just replaced that 5x with 2x plus 3x. Now I put my parentheses, and I divide. So x squared and 2x have an x in common. That leaves me with x plus 2. 3x and 6 have a 3 in common, and that leaves me with x plus 2. And if you prefer writing it underneath and doing the division, x squared divided by x is x. 2x divided by x is 2. That's fine. Okay. But just make sure that you know in the end this is what it's supposed to look like. So you have now an x plus 2. Those match. I know I've done it right. And this is an x plus 3. So my answer then, my factors, are x plus 3 and x plus 2. If I multiply those things together, I get that trinomial that we started with. Remember, factors are always the numbers you multiply together. All right, so we are also going to do 3.2 today, but it's just these two boxes right here, and it's just a continuation of this one. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to circle my A and my C. Okay, and I'm going to go on ahead and multiply these together. 7 times 2 is 14x squared. Okay, so I'm going to get 1x and 14x, negative 1x and negative 14x, 2x and 7x, negative 2x and negative 7x, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Nope. Okay, so that is it. Now I need to find the pair that adds to negative 9x. Oh, look, those two negatives add together. Okay, and now I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. So I'm just going to rewrite this. That starts with 7x squared. Okay, and you see how I have these in this order? It doesn't matter what order I put them in. So I'm going to change this, and I'm going to put the negative 7x first, just because then they'll have a 7 in common. And it doesn't matter if you left it this way, it would work exactly the same. Okay, I just like to try and make it pretty if I can. So minus 2x plus 2. So now these have a 7x in common. That leaves me with x minus 1. Well, these two right here, they have a 2 in common. But if I take out a positive 2, if I divide this by a positive 2, notice here I'm left with a negative x, and they won't match. So here, I have to pull out a negative 2, because negative 2 divided by negative 2 is that positive 1x. And positive 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1. Otherwise, these two parentheses would not match. So you have to be really careful with that. So here I get x minus 1, and I get 7x minus 2. So the exact same thing I did before. The only difference on these ones is it has a coefficient now in front of that x squared. Okay, so I'm going to look at this last one. Okay. So one thing that we haven't talked about is checking to make sure that there is not a greatest common factor first. So if I could divide all of these coefficients by the same number, I would do that right now. Okay, so if I could divide all those, I would do that, and then in my answer, it would come down here and it would look like that. So if I could say I could divide all of those by 3, so that number, 3x or whatever, that number would just hang out right here. Okay. And actually, let's go on ahead and change this example up just a little bit. Let's make this to the third, let's make that squared, and let's make that an x, just so we can practice it. Okay. So all I'm going to do here, my very first thing is I have an x in common, so I'm going to take that x out of all of these, and that'll leave me with that 2x squared plus 9x minus 5. So now when you write your final answer, you're going to have an x out in front of those two factors. And this x is also a factor. So you have to remember that in the end. It's going to come in really important when we start solving these things in a couple of days. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to do my same thing, except since I changed this one, I now need to work with this one. So I'm going to circle my A and my C. Okay. I'm going to ignore the x. I've already got it written down here. Okay. I'm done with that x right now. Okay. So my A times C is negative 10x squared. So that's going to be 1 and negative 10. And at some point, you guys will see that I start leaving these x's off just because I know that it has to be an x squared or an x to the 4th or an x to the 6th. Okay, so it has to be a multiple of 2 here in order for this to work. Or I could have negative 1x and positive 10x. I could have 2x and negative 5x, or negative 2x and 5x. And those are the only ones that add to or multiply to negative 10x. So now I need to find the pair that adds to 9x. So that's going to be this one right here. Okay, and now I'm going to rewrite it. So I have my 2x squared. Notice I'm ignoring that x still. I have my 2x squared minus 1x plus 10x minus 5. Okay, put my parentheses around my pairs. Okay, this one I can take an x out. And I'm left with 2x minus 1. This one, I can take a 5 out. Okay, and remember, I have to decide now if it's positive or negative. So 10 divided by 5 is 2x. Okay, well, these are matching so far, so I'm on the right track with a positive 5 here. And negative 5 divided by 5 is 1. These match, so I know I'm good. Okay, and there's my other pair right there, x plus 5. Right, so that is factoring trinomials. We are going to be using this a ton. If you do not understand this, you have got to get extra help on it, and you've got to get practice on it. This is the most important concept in Algebra 2, and you will be using it nonstop in pre-calculus also. So make sure you understand it. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.